Okay, you're good, David.
How's everyone doing? University of Utah. I am a huge fan of Utah. I lived in Utah for 3 years. I started my career working with the International Rescue Committee in Salt Lake City, where I was responsible for managing a microloan fund that provided entrepreneurship support to refugees, and just really enjoyed my time there. Before leaving Utah, I got plugged into a project out of the University of Utah that was led by Professor Swamitra Mohanty, and they had developed a breathalyzer diagnostic tool for tuberculosis, and we ended up deploying that technology in India. We facilitated an 800-patient clinical trial and raised over $4 million to support the commercialization of that technology. And it was just great to be able to provide some supplemental support to operationalizing that project. As Josh probably mentioned to you earlier in this class, I work at VentureWell now, and our focus is on providing support to innovators and entrepreneurs, predominantly housed within universities, who are commercializing innovations that address global challenges. My responsibility at this firm is to run a program called the E-Teams program, which funds and trains student teams who are looking to acquire funds and business training support to identify pathways to building a business that can have a positive impact on the world. And so what you're doing in this class is extremely relevant and important. And I'd love to share with you actually just one thing that is really relevant to this class, and that is the fact that one of my first startups was a rural electrification startup in Nepal that provided energy access to rural villagers. And when I was sitting in an office in Salt Lake City, Utah, with a couple of my friends, we were starting to do some research online and identified very quickly that energy access was a massive problem globally. About 1.2 billion people today do not have access to electricity. And what they do as a result of not having electricity is that they use typically kerosene lamps to provide lighting in their homes. And as all of you probably know, kerosene is extremely harmful from a health perspective. And it's also economically debilitating in that it's not the most cost-effective solution that could be accessed by these populations. And when I first went to Nepal on internship with the State Department, when I was about your age, I was 20 years old, I saw firsthand the impact that energy poverty had on an individual's ability to lift themselves out of poverty, and promised myself that a couple years later, I would return to that country to do something about it. And so I started Sumu Energy to jumpstart economic development in remote villages where agriculture or small retail shops were the norm. And because I wanted to provide lighting and connectivity opportunity to community members who wanted to use light and connectivity as a way out of poverty. And there was an individual within the Utah community who provided me the support to start this in the first place. Does anyone know the company Skull Candy?
Yeah.
Y'all know that company, headphone company? Yeah. So this guy in this, I'll show you a picture of this guy. This guy right here on the right is Jeremy Andrus, and Jeremy was the CEO of Skull Candy, and he provided me with a $25,000 grant to go out to Nepal and start my venture. And at the time, what I had put together is likely less than what you put together in the class you're in right now. I had an idea, and I was passionate about a problem that I wanted to solve. and I was ready to take a risk. And I wanted to take that risk because the opportunity to have a positive impact on people was so great. And I was motivated to do something about it. And as a result of saying, hey, Jeremy, I want to buy a one-way ticket to Nepal right now and go out to Nepal and do this project, he believed in my commitment to that cause and was willing to provide me with support to help me go out and do that. And you're probably asking the question, well, how did you meet this person? And very quickly, I'll tell you, I went on LinkedIn and I messaged as many people as I could in the entrepreneurship community in Utah when I first arrived, and while I was running that program out of the International Rescue Committee. And I wanted to do this because at the time I didn't have any experience in entrepreneurship. I was running an entrepreneurship program to help refugees start businesses. I knew I had to rely on people like Jeremy to help. And I said, hey, I know that you've got great business expertise. I've run this program to help refugees start businesses. Would you be willing to dedicate some time to mentoring these refugees? And he said yes. And a couple of weeks later, I met him at his office, and at the time, Springville. He runs Traeger Grills now. It's a wood pellet company in Utah. And we went out to lunch and developed a friendship. And he wanted to support me in doing that. And I think the key lesson there was you can't get anything that you want unless you ask. So you got to ask for help. And when you ask for help, you can unlock a lot of potential. And when you ask for help, you've got to be working on a problem that you find meaning in solving, because that's when you're going to activate your passion and your commitment. And people are going to be able to see that authenticity in you. And you need to be solving problems you really care about, because that's how you project authenticity onto other people. And if you can project that authenticity, then people are going to want to help you. All you got to do is ask. I went on after this business to start a few others, one of which was in travel software, the last of which was a botanical garden in the country of Laos in Southeast Asia. And then I returned back to the States to run a program at VentureWell. And the VentureWell program in its history has trained over 800 entrepreneurs who've gone on to raise $121 million in follow-on funding. And we've created just short of 200 businesses from this program. A couple of examples of students who've come through our program. This is a project that is out of University of Pennsylvania. They've developed a biosensor to predict the fruit maturity for apple packers. So they've got a lot of cold storage facilities across Pennsylvania. There's tons of apples packed into these cold storage units. As soon as you open one of those, you've got to distribute every single apple inside of that cold storage unit. Hundreds of thousands of apples sit within each one of those. And so it's a huge economic problem, because they don't have line of sight into that cold storage unit, and they guess which one they should open first without understanding the maturity rates. Each apple packer loses about $1.2 million every single year as a result of this problem. And every year across the country, 621 million apples are unused and just thrown to the wayside as a result of not having this problem solved with technologies. So they've developed biosensors to integrate into those apple packers so that they have line of sight and can do that proper maturity detection, and through that they can optimize their supply chain. They've won a lot of awards. They're in the process of closing a $3 million round. They were 20 years old when they first came through this program. They just had an idea. They were doing research at their university, right? And that research spurred curiosity. And that curiosity said, to all of them, hey, why don't we make something of this? And they took a chance, and look at now where they are. This is another project that's very similar, in the ag tech space. And do you see those little packets in those fruit? Those packets actually allow fruits and vegetables to last for 3 or more days than they normally would. And it's because they use ethylene and project that onto the fruits and vegetables. And they've just raised $13 million round a couple of weeks ago, and they're one of the hottest startups in the Chicago area currently. And then this is RespiraLabs. And this is a really personal story for Maria. Maria's grandmother had CPOD. Does anyone know what CPOD is? Chronic obstruction pulmonary disease. And this affects the lung, and she realized that there wasn't any solution to accurately predict when COPD attacks happen. So she decided to work with her husband, who works at Google as a software engineer, to develop a solution that could measure trapped air and be an early marker of COPD. And she's come through all of our programs, garnering $25,000, and she leveraged that money to eventually get an NSF SBIR grant of $225,000. And she's won a couple of other awards to help her explore the commercialization of this device. She's in her late 20s, grad student, and pursuing this full time now. This is one of my favorites, and Greenlight Planet. You guys have probably heard of this company. If you're in solar, you do a little solar, this is a great company to know. I was with the founder, Patrick Walsh, a couple of weeks ago and spent a week with him. And it's a $100 million company serving over 27 million rural consumers across 60 countries with simple solar lighting and connectivity devices. So they're in the solar pico technology market, and they were one of the first to be in that market back in 2006 when Patrick was a student. He was a student at University of Illinois, went through Engineers Without Borders to India, identified a problem with energy access, came back to University of Illinois, got a couple $1,000s to develop a prototype, and then took a risk. And that risk was, I'm going to move to China. I know nothing about China, but I know I need to get to China because all of the electronics manufacturing is done in Shenzhen. So he moved to Shenzhen, and he stayed there for over 3 months. And then 3 months turned into 6 months, and 6 into 12. And he developed a really in-depth understanding about solar manufacturing from the panel perspective, battery perspective, lighting perspective, and then use that knowledge to prototype and ultimately deploy a version 1 of his product in northern India, just outside of Ladakh. And that business is now, as I told you, 2018 Economic Times Brand of the Year. They've raised a lot of money. They continue to innovate. And just in 2006, they were in our program. The founder's only 34 years old. It's very impressive how far they've come. So you probably picked up on a couple of themes through this, and that is, VentureWell really cares about social impact, and we only work on solving problems that address the world's biggest challenges. And we do this with over 400 institutions around the United States, including University of Utah. Our funders are Bill and Melinda Gates, National Science Foundation, Department of State, USAID. My programs are predominantly funded by the Lemelson Foundation and Autodesk. This is a program that provides you with the opportunity to have access to up to $25,000 in grant funding to support an exploration of commercialization for the technology that you've developed. And as part of this, you attend typically a 3-day workshop with 14 or 15 teams from around the country who are all working on clean energy technologies or medical technologies, and you get to explore how you can apply the technology you've developed into the marketplace. Let's see. I'd say probably the biggest value add of this program is the network that you can develop. Now, I will say that University of Utah has excellent entrepreneurship resources. I know Troy D'Ambrosio, who runs the Lassonde Institute, and it's really a phenomenal resource that you can tap into to access events, speaker series, accelerators, incubators, design workshops, hackathons, you name it. You've got a lot of stuff that you can tap into. And then the question is, once you've accessed a lot of those local resources, it's how can I regionalize my network? How can I nationalize my networking? And how can I be in touch and build relationships with some of the nation's and world's best practitioners, academics, entrepreneurs, manufacturers, strategic partners, co-founders. You're always trying to be around the very best people. And VentureWell is an organization that's providing you a platform to access great people. And so do that at University of Utah, but also look on the outside and look at organizations like VentureWell as a chance to get in touch with really, really talented people who are aligned on the values of social impact and technology development. Some of the inventions, types of things that we fund, as I mentioned, clean energy materials. So everything that you are working on today in this class would be eligible for the VentureWell E-Team program. You'll notice that we have a very big focus on hard tech. So we do a lot of hardware-based technology investments. And the benefit of that is you're usually working within a network that has a lot of relatability in terms of the challenges that they solve in product development, manufacturing, intellectual property. Those are all things that all hardware-based startups need to think about. Some things that would not be eligible, I'll just want to point out a few things here, and that is you've got to have a clear social or environmental or health impact to be eligible for the program. You should have some type of hardware-specific invention. You should develop an understanding about your intellectual property. You can go on something like Google Patents. If you really want to think about commercializing your project, you can go on Google Patents and search on your own to see if anything out there is similar to what you're developing. And that simple search and your communication of that search in an application to VentureWell will help us clarify how defensible what you're working on is. And it's something that we really care about. And then lastly, your project should be student-driven. We typically do not fund faculty-driven projects, but we welcome faculty advisors, people who can guide the development of your project. So if you want to be an E-Team, you've got to be from a US-based VentureWell membership institution, which University of Utah is. You've got to have 2 active students in your project, and you should have identified a faculty advisor, which could be your professor. Those are all things that you won't have to worry about. And the first step is to go through our qualification phase application process. And what's really cool about this is you only have to submit a 1-page proposal. Tell me about your market potential. Tell me about your technology. Tell me about your intellectual property, your team, your competition. 1 page, send it to me. Within a couple of weeks, I'll let you know if you're going to be eligible, which likely you are based on the class that you're in. And then you'll get on the phone with me and I'll give you personalized feedback. This is one of the high-touch elements of our program that differentiates us from a lot of other programs, is that we get on the phone with every single person that applies to our program. We give you feedback. So if you're thinking about something, I want to give you feedback on your idea and help you get better. And that's even before you get accepted into the program. So I've talked about that. Check membership. Another thing that you'll need, once you get beyond that qualification phase, as I discussed, you'll submit a 4 to 5 page proposal. And that will just allow you to build on some of the preliminary stuff that you had put together originally. And then you're going to also submit letters of support. So we want to make sure that you have people who are supportive of the work that you're doing out there. And then you're going to have to include your team member resumes. And then after you submit it, we have a collection of experts in entrepreneurship education or entrepreneurship, they're entrepreneurs, or they're scientists, they're doctors, they're engineers. They provide review, similar to National Science Foundation, on your proposals, and we select typically 30 to 40% of the teams that apply to us. So your success rate's quite good. And then within 60 days, you'll hear from us about our funding decisions. And your audience, as I had discussed, I'm typically sitting in that review, on those review panels, and then we're sourcing from our broader community to help make us make those determinations on the teams that we fund. Here's an example of some of the things that we're looking at. You know, you really got to have a strong team. That's probably the #1 factor that's being considered. You need to prove to us that you have a unique technology, that there's market and commercial potential for that technology, that you have some type of support system in place, meaning institutional support. So do you have faculty engaged in your project, and is the department chair or professor supportive of the work that you're doing? And then, you know, is there a clear impact angle of your technology? And what does your work plan look like? And are the technical market milestones that you've communicated realistic? Some of the things that really make applications stand apart are letters of support from commercial partners, a real clear path to market. So who is that first customer that you're going to identify and target, and why is that the most logical customer to target? And then from a competition perspective, how are you different? Who are those competitors? How are you going to sustain competitive advantage over those other customers? Now, if you get accepted into this, then you'll get $5,000 and you'll get to participate in a 3-day training at MIT. Grant fundings go through your university, and then they'll be distributed to the team. And the reason why this is beneficial is that you don't have any tax liability associated with the grant funding. That's all administered through the Office of Sponsored Research. And then we help do a lot of that administration on our end, so that you can just focus on using those funds on both technology development and customer discovery. One thing to look at as you're thinking about policies, and so you really want to think about how that might impact your relationship with your technology and your relationship with your university. And going to the technology transfer office, or at University of Utah would be, I think, the Venture Technology Commercialization Program. They can help you navigate this process. Now, this will happen 3 times a year. You have the chance to apply to this next cohort in the spring. Our deadline is February 5th. That qualification phase, as I was describing earlier, it's got a deadline of December 11th. So you can put in an application for that in this next week or two if you want feedback within a week's time. And I would certainly encourage you to do that. If that's too tight of a timeline, you think you need more time to work on your project and really suss things out, you have other time frames that you could tap into. Excellent. Well, with that said, I'm going to stop and open the floor for some questions.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, David. I didn't realize, by the way, you lived in Salt Lake City, so that's a nice coincidence.
Oh, yeah.
Let me ask the students, do you have any quick questions or comments? So to give you some overview of what we have done so far, most of the students are engineering students. And from a business point of view, we just started doing the business canvas. So we split into teams and attack a certain area or a problem. And the business canvas is the vehicle that they have been using to attack the entrepreneurial part of it. And they just started it, so it's fairly, I would say, preliminary. But I think having you talk about your experience is certainly inspirational. and also understanding VentureWell as an amazing opportunity available to them is certainly very, very, very useful. Especially, just getting the network, like you were pointing out, going beyond Utah, and certainly getting the training at MIT and so on, certainly very, very exciting. Hopefully, some of the students will consider applying them. I don't make it compulsory, so it's up to them, of course, because they have to be passionate about it. But
well, hey, anyone that wants to further explore, here's my email. You can email me. I'm happy to be helpful. If you ever want to explore stuff in the energy space, I've got a lot of connections in that space. If you want to explore entrepreneurship, I can talk shop there. I can make connections for you as well. We're also going to be in Utah in March for a conference, so you can be welcome to step into that and explore some of our programs at the conference. So just encouraging engagement.
Actually, if you're going to be in Utah for a conference, you should drop me a note. I'll post it on the class website. So if some students are interested, they can.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
You can send me an email. I'll remind you.
That sounds great. Excellent.
The one question I think which probably some of the students might have is, from a practical perspective, how does it work in the successful examples? Are there, like, the students come at the stage of a senior or a graduate student goes through the program, and do they typically quit school? They graduate? Like, what is? I've seen all of them, but
they usually maintain their student status, and I would say about 60% of the teams that we support are undergraduate students.
Okay.
30% are master's students, and 20% are PhD students. That's been the breakdown that I've seen in the past year and a half. But yeah, they make time for it, and one of my last businesses, I'm moonlighted, which means I just worked nights on my business until it developed into something that made enough money for me to give up my day job so I could pursue entrepreneurship full time. When you're a student, one of the outputs you probably want is a degree, but you can try to pursue a project, an entrepreneurial project, part time, and then when you graduate, maybe it does become something that you consider full time. Maybe you need to get a job for a little while while continuing to work at night on this project until it gets enough traction to justify taking a calculated risk and pursuing it full time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
So as far as a lot of entrepreneurship that University of Utah provides, usually the University of Utah owns the patent.
Yeah, so the question from one of the students was, how does the patenting process work in IP? And I know you briefly touched it. If you want to just go over it again.
Yeah.
Like, how does it typically work? So UPenn owns the patent, I assume, and it gets licensed to the company. I mean, that was the question from the student.
Yeah, I mean, you can go on like uspto.gov, and you could file a provisional patent for like $50 today on something, and then that would give you a patent pending, like trademark that you could use until you decide a pathway for getting a higher level of defensibility in patents. I'd say, like, first step is, if you want to explore patents, reach out to your technology transfer office, because that's what they do. Typically, the Technology Venture Commercialization Program, TVC, at University of Utah, they try to identify a bunch of university patents and figure out how to sell those patents to bigger companies. And so you could go in there and you could also explore a ton of patents that they already have developed and curated, and you could use one of those patents and try to commercialize it, or you could get guidance from them on how to file a patent. And in many cases, the universities will pay for the patenting of your technology. So that's something to look into. Hey, if you have a commercialization aim, they may take a small percentage of your company in exchange for doing all the patent filing on your behalf. And if you want to do that independently, then the best route to do is, start with Google patents and do a prior art search to determine freedom to operate. So you're just exploring all of the different patents in your line of work and figuring out if you have something that is novel and different and obvious. And then if there is something there, you can move forward with writing your own patent application, which is highly technical, but very, very feasible to do. I have lots of friends who've done it out of Utah. So I think that would be a good starting point to consider.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So I mean, the short answer is you could own your own patent in Utah as a student. The university doesn't have to. If you go to the technology office, they will pay for everything and they will own it, but they can license it back to you if you form a company. That's typically what happens. Of course, there's a lot of detail, as you saw. They did have a lecture from the venture office as well, so they have some exposure to that.
Good. Yeah.
But it's certainly a new world as engineers. We're not trained to think this way, and my goal with this class is to expose the engineering students to this way of thinking, essentially.
Yeah, that's great.
Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, let's thank David for his time. Actually, that was. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate it. And I did post his slides on the class website. Definitely take a look. If you have questions, feel free to email him, email me. And as David mentioned, he'll be here in March if anyone's interested in talking to him. Certainly, if you're ever thinking about entrepreneurship, which I hope you all are, go to the conference.